Thank you all for coming. Welcome. On behalf of George Washington University, both the International Institute of Tourism Studies and the Institute for Global and International Studies with the George Washington School of Business and the Elliott School of International Affairs, respectively, I want to thank you all for coming and welcome you here to the GW School of Business. I know we have a nice mix of students and faculty and professionals, some alumni. So on behalf of Dr. Barbara Miller and myself, and I should say I'm Kristen Lamoureux, I'm the director of the International Institute of Tourism Studies here at GW. I would like to once again thank you and welcome you. This topic is one that is near and dear to our hearts in both the Elliott School and here in the School of Business, because this is something we've been dealing with for so many years. You know, the tourism program here at GW has been around for 40 years. The International Institute of Tourism Studies has been around for over 25 years. And this issue of tourism and development is one that continues to come up as categorically important, you know, and I can't tell you how many times I speak in forums, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about developing countries or Native American communities here in the US or wherever it is, where people tell me, you know, they're so surprised to hear the word tourism and international development in the same sentence, because we typically think of tourism as a kind of fun, happy experience, but we know, and our colleagues down the road at the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and the IFC, they all know that tourism is a very important tool in the fight against global poverty, the conservation and preservation of the world's natural resources, issues like gender equity, and so many more so many of the issues that we battle with every day. So the nexus of this topic was to talk about this topic from an academic perspective. We know in our silos that we talk about tourism quite a bit, but what we hope to do today is to try to broaden that conversation a bit amongst both GW as well as the other schools within the consortium. And I know we have professors from Georgetown and American U as well, and I welcome you, of course, to GW. And to try to just broaden this discussion a little bit and stop thinking of this as a business issue or an international affairs issue or a law issue, and thinking about how we can raise the profile of this discussion and continue moving tourism in a positive direction and help to mitigate some of the negatives through mutual collaboration. So with that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. And those of you that don't have an agenda, if you'd like, you can raise your hand and we'll make sure you get one. But we're going to start just briefly with our, I'll give you a brief overview. We're going to start with our keynote speaker, and then we're going to go into two series of panel discussions, and then Dr. Narati and Dr. Hawkins will tie it up at the end with some closing remarks. And then, of course, we hope everyone stays and joins us for the reception this afternoon. So I'm not going to read Dr. Messerli's bio, because first of all, she would kill me if I did, and second of all, you have it in your presentation, in your agenda. So I'm going to just say that in addition to being literally one of the nicest people on earth, and she really is, if you talk to her for 5 minutes, you know that, she is one of the most dynamic scholars and practitioners in this field of tourism and international development that we have. She comes from a long academic background, and then she made that enormous leap to the World Bank, which is difficult to do and is very difficult for an American to do. So we were incredibly proud of her. We're also proud because she doesn't always admit this, but she is a graduate of our program now. She admits it. Hannah was actually getting a doctorate at Cornell years ago and wanted to study tourism, and because the folks at Cornell couldn't handle that topic, they sent her to us. She got a master's in tourism, all respect to our friends at Cornell, and she graduated with a master's of tourism administration here at GW and went on to finish her PhD and went on to a very successful academic career before making the transition over to our neighbors down the street at the World Bank. So I would like to ask Hannah to please join us, and I'm going to ask that we, if there are any questions, we'll have some time at the end for questions, but we hold the questions to the end because she has a very full presentation.
Beyond welcoming all of you, I want to begin by asking you a question. Tough question. You ready? Why are you here today? It's raining outside. Why aren't we there? We're here because we want to continue our climb along the path of raising both the contribution, the value, the insights of tourism research. And it's really great that we get to do it in wonderful places, such as here at Machu Picchu. But fundamentally, what we want to do is continue our thinking on tourism research, and specifically the different forms and approaches that it can take. So we're going to look really quickly today at why tourism, why now? What is it about tourism and tourism research in the World Bank? How is that evolving? Many of you have worked with us in the past, presently, and going into the future. I'm going to highlight a couple of examples of research. And then I want to share with you a few thoughts in terms of going forward as researchers, some kind of practical ideas based upon my experience, and hopefully inspiring all of you. So, fundamentally, in terms of why tourism, we have to convince the skeptics. You know, in academia, in government, in the World Bank, in the development arena, there are the skeptics who say, yeah, right, tourism research, really. Well, the fact is that, you know, tourism is a way, we've said this over and over, on an economic basis to create jobs, to help contribute to the alleviation of poverty, to enable social cohesion, to support private sector development activity. And as Dr. Lamoureux just mentioned, you know, it's about coming up with solutions around both environmental protection, cultural heritage assets, conservation, and also improving livelihoods. So, you know, why now? Look, tourism historically has been an idea wrapped around Western, you know, well-developed Western countries and travelers traveling often to developing countries. But going forward, what we really see is some changes as it relates to both those people traveling from developed economies, but also within developing economies. And that changes the impact, and we know more and more. We know more about supply, and we know more about demand. And that's come from both economic perspectives, but also in terms of social development, in terms of environmental and cultural heritage development. So as we think about tourism as an economically productive and sustainable sector, what we also think about is how can we work with destinations and countries on competitiveness. 10 years ago, we didn't even talk about competitiveness in tourism other than, well, maybe this beach resort and that beach resort. Now it's much more about a competitive industry across countries, across destinations within countries, and also across regions. And that's fundamentally because the consumer, obviously, can decide whether or not to go to a beach in Jamaica, Mauritius, or Hainan Island in China. So we come back to, what does it take to build a successful tourism sector? And when we think about that, we think about, okay, making it, as I said, economically productive, as well as sustainable. But in the World Bank, we also look at it from the perspective of how is it that we can work with tourism to help alleviate poverty and help spread wealth equitably around the world. So over the years, the bank has evolved in its thinking and has been involved with a number of different activities as it relates to tourism, sometimes with the tourism label, sometimes not. And as we began today, we said, you know, in tourism, is it better to lead or follow when you're looking at research? And one of the opportunities is that often tourism is enveloped in other development activities, but it also can lead and be the primary focus of research. And so our challenge as researchers is to really think about, okay, are we going to lead or follow? Is this a tourism-specific activity dedicated to tourism, or is it really a research, participating in a research agenda that's trying to solve or address a larger global development issue? And in each of these sort of phases in our thinking in the bank, we have worked with governments and the private sector to be able to come up with solutions, some more workable than others. But what has that form has that taken? And I'll just share with you specifically in my few years at the bank. I'm relatively young. I've only been there 7 years now. Many of the people I work with seem to have been there 35 or 50. But we began by doing a significant stock taking and developing a whole database that looked at tourism in each African country. Because when I first joined the bank, nobody really knew what was happening with tourism in Africa. And we developed a short strategy around how would we work with different countries in taking forward their tourism agenda. And this was all based on our research that subsequently turned into a book on harnessing tourism for development. But what this has led to is from the approved strategy going on to do various primary research or analytical studies, followed by those studies contributing to lending operations, meaning operations that the bank funds to help governments develop their tourism sectors. And then finally, the development of the World Bank Group Integrated Tourism Solution. And that is essentially cutting across all the different areas of the bank to come up with tourism solutions for various clients. So the environmental people, the urban people, the cultural heritage people, the finance and private sector development people, all coming together to focus on tourism. It's an exciting time, and one that I think will lead to some new solutions and ideas. Just two quick examples of sort of cross-cutting types of tourism research that were done that, frankly, 5 years ago would not have happened. This is the Tanzania Economic Update with the appropriate title, The Elephant in the Room, Unlocking the Potential of the Tourism Industry for Tanzanians. This is a study that focuses around capturing greater tax revenues through the tourism sector, but also making sure that the tourism sector can protect the elephants in Tanzania, principally because they're dying and being poached at a frighteningly alarming rate. This is another example, again on Tanzania, and this was, by the way, done by the macroeconomists. This one was done by the environmentalists on Tanzania's tourism futures, harnessing natural assets. This is an econometric study looking at the economic impact on communities around Serengeti and other parks in Tanzania, and to see how is it that communities are benefiting and what are their choices in terms of protecting the land, elephants, and also at the same time having some economic benefits. So, my mission in my next few minutes is to share with you 6 examples, and there will be a quiz at the end. 6 examples of tourism research in the World Bank to give you an idea of the variety of tourism research that we do. And also, I really hope to engage all of you to be thoughtful about what kind of creative research can we do going forward. The first, tourism in Africa, harnessing tourism for growth and improved livelihoods. This was the book that was the outcome of the initial stock taking and research that we did. It was done by a team of 4 of us. It has a synthesis of what are the issues facing the tourism industry across Africa, and particularly to harness it as a development tool. Includes 23 case studies. Yeah. The reason for that was to provide as many examples from both the destination level to the national level, the regional level, from Abu Dhabi to Maldives to Cancun to points in Indonesia, of how tourism has developed over time. We worked with Ian Christie on this, who many of you know is a former professor here in the tourism program, to develop these as a way to really provide examples. So here's the good news. We have a very rich selection of case studies and synthesis of constraints on the sector. Not so good news is that nobody reads books. So, okay, but the good news is that when we work with ministries and also even going across in academia, this is the book that people start with as a way to say, okay, what do we know? What can we learn from the past? A second example of research that we've done that I think is more along the lines of the typical traditional research is this study on tourism in Uganda. This involved developing surveys administering them at airports and around Uganda to capture tourist behavior. That in turn was looked at in terms of input and output tables to look at and gauge economic impact. This has led to policy implications and has also enabled Uganda to really understand the economic benefit of the tourism sector. We worked with actually a PhD student out of University of Maryland, as well as quite a senior environmental economist in order to do this research. But what was really interesting about it is that we designed it and implemented it in a way that local people in Uganda, we built their capacity in survey taking and analysis, and they now continue to repeat this study. We are in a world that is filled with crises, lots of different kinds of crises. And so it is inherent and a responsibility for us within the bank to look at research as it relates to crises. And in fact, one of the areas where we have contributed is in the area of an established research protocol done by the UNDP called post-disaster needs assessment. And what does that mean? That means that after a tsunami or flooding, a group of people across the various organizations go in and try to assess both damage and loss and recovery. In the case of Thailand with the floods, the PD&A started and somebody said, hey, you know, maybe we ought to get somebody from tourism in here, right? And you recognize that, in fact, while there was a focus on bridges and transport and roads and schools, it was also about recovering the tourism sector. And in that regard, we've subsequently continued to support various post-disaster needs assessments with a tourism focus, including in Cape Verde following the volcano eruption, as well as most recently in Nepal with a post-disaster needs assessment that included a tourism focus for Nepal. So, I want to share with you an example of some research that we did that started out in one direction and then went into another one. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where we literally set out to prove a hypothesis, which was this is the way you do tourism development in protected areas, as was demonstrated in Namibia. And in the case of Namibia, there are a number of communal conservancies, so protected areas that are under the communities. And the challenge was fundamentally, how do we engage the private sector to be involved with these communities and their land in a way that helps to also benefit the communities. And we went in and at the invitation of the WWF and along with IFC and the bank to say, okay, let's go prove this, and we're going to show that this is the model. And guess what? We worked with a wonderful researcher, some of you may know Dr. Amit Sharma out of Penn State, and we got in there, and you know what? Every single one of the different communal conservancies had a different solution, and there was no model. And we're like, oh, wait a minute. We went in to have the model, right? So what did we end up? We ended up with a white paper that said, look, here are the challenges when you are financing commercial joint venture lodges in Namibia's communal conservancies. But then we also went ahead and said, okay, but really what our findings are is that there are challenges for these entities to get financing and to have access to finance. And so we then prepared this, which is 9 tips to getting financed. I mean, like, really, this is research? The reality is it's very much bringing it back from what we found, what we were able to test and understand was working, not working, to be able to say, here are some of the strategies that can be used around the world, not just in Namibia, in developing this kind of activity. Next, if I may. Number 5, Ebola. Oh. How many times have I had a conversation where we're focused on Africa, West Africa, and we say, we need to be doing more tourism research, more tourism activity, and I get this, oh yeah, Ebola, not going to go there. It's not going to happen. Like, wait a minute, this is when we need to be involved. We need to be involved when the crisis is happening and evolving. Now, this is a story, I'm going to tell you just very quickly, about tourism research funding that comes and goes, and hopefully is coming back, but This small paper here was called The Economic Impact of Ebola on Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, done by the macroeconomists in the bank who said, oh yeah, you know, there's some folks that are doing tourism. Maybe we should let them have a page or two. Like, you bet. We're going to be in here because this is going to have an impact, right? And what did that lead to? It led to us being able to, in effect, source internal funds for about $400,000 to do a massive effort in West Africa to work with both the public sector and the private sector to recover from Ebola in terms of their tourism activities, and specifically, you're going to love this part, specifically to be prepared for crises in the future. Because what do we know about Africa? And what do we know about the rest of the world? There's going to be more crises. And so how do we build that capacity? So here was this research. Go in, assess, do the analytics, and then go from there to come up with the programs and do the technical assistance to build understanding of how to cope with crises. Great. We're all good to go. What happens? One of the donors has some issues with some of the governments in West Africa and decides not to fund the research program under which this was designed to be done. Okay, backtrack, we say, but this is still critically important. And so we have been able to now raise some other funds and able to move ahead with this. But it has been over about an 8-9 month period, number one, and number two, it is really, as we go forward, focused on countries in West Africa that did not have Ebola, but that their tourism sector suffered. And how is it that they can recover? And what kinds of measurements and activities can we work with them to be able to move forward? Now, I want to talk with you just finally about one other piece of research. And this is actually a very, from my perspective, just a fascinating and interesting one in terms of its creativity and being slightly different. In Palestine, there has been the development of about a 320-kilometer walking path. Now, when you think about it, a walking path in Palestine? Really? But in fact, what this has been done is it has been designed as a way to both bring economic development to rural areas, to empower women, and also fundamentally to work with youth. You build a hiking path and begin to build capacity around mapping issues, signage, as well as working with women to develop homestays and be able to host people that are hiking along the path. Originally, this was designed as a way to attract international tourists, and guess what happened? Over time, it's actually attracted more Palestinians and has actually helped to really build a trekking culture within Palestine that was never anticipated. This is being done, interestingly enough, through an NGO out of Harvard Law School that is part of the negotiation project, and through their working on negotiation in Israel and Palestine over the years, had the idea to develop this walking path. And now, what has this got to do with us here in this room? Here's what's very interesting. Within the World Bank's support of this project, there are I think 5 to 8 different research papers of action research around this particular project. And what it comes down to is this. Yes, we can count the number of walkers. We can count the number of people staying overnight in homestays. We can count the number of women that get business guidance and business development activities. But how do we know about really how this is changing the way people feel? And they're what we refer to now as social cohesion. You walk on a path with someone who's not from your town or your background, you begin to learn things about each other that maybe can really contribute going forward. So those research papers are looking at just this. How is it that, in this case, a path and all of the rural economic development activity that happens can contribute to social cohesion and development in this area through very specific research papers that are actually part of the project and the operation. Okay, 6 examples, different, some primary, some secondary, certainly some that are locally focused, but all focused on answering a question, solving a problem, contributing to a global solution. So, 4 quick points on thinking about tourism research going forward. The first being, it's important to find the entry point. I know across this room there are many disciplines that are represented. There are many different ways to approach research. What we have to think about is who are the players and what is the creative approach that we can take? Is it like an Abraham Path initiative, or is it in fact looking at counting elephants and helping communities to benefit in Tanzania? Convincing the skeptics. Let me tell you, they're everywhere. They're going to continue to be everywhere. Everyone's an expert on tourism. That's great. That's good. We'll keep working with them along the way. You know a lot more. Get on with your work. We are here today, and as you will see from these panels this afternoon, this is really an extraordinarily rich area for tourism to integrate into the overall development agenda. And so, yes, you know, it's about doing tourism research, but it's about gender and tourism. It's about youth and tourism. It's about jobs and tourism. Climate change and tourism. I haven't talked about that today, and then I'll have to wait for the next time. Disasters and crises. This picture here on the right, by the way, is a picture from the flooding, both before and after. And you can see just the impact as it relates to, obviously, in Thailand. So, one other comment, and this is, you know, based on my personal experience of research money coming and going, which I know we also experience in the university environment. You know, follow the money, partner wisely. We partnered with World Economic Forum, we partnered with World Wildlife Fund, we've partnered with NGOs, we've partnered with governments, with private sector. Package your research smart. Just because it's attractive and interesting research doesn't mean that it can't be academic. There's a tremendous opportunity to combine those in a way that's both theoretically grounded but also actionable and interesting. So, our goal for today, continue to climb the research agenda and to look at creative and different ways to both see the view as well as to lead or follow. And with my closing, I just want to introduce 4 people. If you would just stand very quickly. Stephanie Ridenour works with me at the World Bank in the area of Middle East and North Africa and has been working with us on the Abraham Path initiative. Vera Zhao, who stand up here, has been working with me also at the bank and is now in the Global Tourism Solutions Group, worked with one of the lead researchers on the tourism section of the post-disaster needs assessment in Cape Verde. And she can tell you all about going into a post-volcano environment and the tourism research that's done. Keep standing. Sofia Zukova is also with us at the bank. She is Russian and Spanish and works in the area in the bank that includes doing a tourism project in Russia. And that is focused on cultural heritage tourism development that specifically is around building tourism in small towns that have economic challenges, not sushi. And my 4th colleague that is here, Dr. Faza. Faza, as you know, is a current student here in the tourism program and recently just successfully defended her PhD last week and now is going on to finish her master's here and has been working with me on the Ebola research and as the funding has come and gone, continues to work with me in that area as well. So I hope you have a chance to talk to these 4 outstanding women about their experience with tourism research and allow me to thank you and to leave with a final thought. High achievement always takes place in the framework of high expectation. Thank you very much.
So we have time for some questions and answers, and we have mics that we'll be passing around.
Andrew Simmons. I work in real estate now, but used to work in urban design in China doing cultural planning in China and Vietnam on master plans. Anyway, great presentation, but I just wanted to ask, actually, just in terms of methodology and processes, if you can talk about case studies and actually, say, quantitative versus qualitative, and the issue of a challenge, which is certainly not unique to the bank, but of pressure, I suppose, institutional pressure to not sufficiently contextualize case studies and their application to different environments. And so the quantitative and qualitative research come out of completely different epistemologies. But just in terms of practice, there's pressure towards quantitative research, but qualitative actually is able to identify get to the heart of the matter of what is context specific. And so I'm just wondering how, since you have a terrific academic background, and then as a practitioner, how you're coming across, grappling with some of those issues. Thanks.
Basically, you've become bipolar. I shouldn't make jokes about it, but you end up having two different viewpoints. But let me, Andrew, thank you. Great question. Let me take a couple of questions and then answer. Other questions?
I'm just curious, we have some excellent journals, that do a lot of research, tourism research. And I'm just wondering, all that knowledge, whether the World Bank or other organizations are taking advantage of all that knowledge that's being created, and this is obviously academic, peer-reviewed. So I'm just wondering, what do we do with all of this? I mean, there's some excellent studies, both quantitative and quantitatively, and so I'm just wondering, how can we take advantage of this?
I'm originally from Eritrea, and I'm working in Afghanistan at civil society groups at the moment.
I mean, couldn't you working in
In Afghanistan with civil society groups.
Great, great. And are you a student or?
I'm actually doing research on tourism.
Great, great. Okay, good.
Particularly for governments working in challenging environments like Eritrea and Afghanistan, where tourism might not be a focus for investment, and they don't see it really as the priority in terms of economic development. In terms of research, what kind of tourism research is necessary or is convincing to local country governments to invest in tourism, and which impacts their kind of soft power approaches to diplomacy in terms of peace building, etc., to have kind of secondary effects?
My name is Gabriela. I come from Venezuela, and I'm a student of the Public Administration School here at UW. So you said that Ebola should not be a barrier for someone to visit a country. And we are having kind of the same problem in Venezuela, but with insecurity, because we are one of the most dangerous countries in the world at the moment. So how can we change that perception in order to recover tourism in Venezuela?
Research methodology and the if you will, the constant friction of quantitative versus qualitative, and I think what there's underlying that also in the area of tourism is tourism research, serious research. There's always that kind of piece. I think we are very fortunate in that we have much more information available to us than we did in the past. And if we look at, for instance, even World Economic Forum's Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index, right, where there's a whole slew of different indicators that are used based upon primarily quantitative measurement over time. That gives us a base that we haven't had in the past. The challenge is, though, is obviously when you're doing a specific research activity, are you going to do, in effect, a quantitative approach, a qualitative approach, or some sort of mixed method? And then the other challenge is, as was, for instance, in the case of Namibia that I raised, we started out saying, okay, we're going to look at Namibia, and our goal is that we can, make it a case study that can be applied around the world. I think every step in tourism research really is very individual to the actual research problem. And there's no simple solution other than for us to keep building the agenda and utilizing different methods. And also, as is the case for what we do in the bank, is to work with other areas and units to use some of their research methods. So let me just say, in the case of Russia, in the project that we're doing, working with a group of local economic development experts and urban specialists. And so the approach that we've taken to do a program design, which is based on doing initial research, really has followed a number of methods that they've had used in local economic development that I had never even really seen before or been involved with. So I think there's this constant pressure, and I think it's a good pressure because it enables us to be able to look from different lenses and different perspectives. What's the best way depends on the actual research question and issue. Juan, your question on journals and tapping this information. I will show my age for a moment and say that I can remember the time as a PhD student when there were 3 academic journals in tourism. It made reading really easy because you could get through them pretty quickly. That's not the case now. Every time I look around, it's like, oh my God, here's another academic journal in tourism. And how do we really harness that? I think we harness it in a couple different ways. One is having great students that go through programs like here at GW and then go on and work in organizations, both in terms of developmental institutions as well as in universities, as well as in NGOs and civil society, to be able to say, okay, what lessons have we learned and how do we apply them? Because there's 2 issues. Is one, what is the state-of-the-art thinking? And then what is it, how do we use this going forward? And I think the short answer to your question is to make sure that all of us and those in the greater tourism community really stay on top of, look to, and use the research. Dr. Riddle's work in diaspora is a great example of both understanding what the current state of the art is, but also continuing to apply it and grow it and using it. And so I think that's where our opportunity in the bank is every time we work with one of our client countries to say, okay, here's what we know best about developing destinations in an integrated manner on the basis of all the research that's been done or on the basis of what we've learned from community development or other types of activity, and then be able to put that into the next step and the next round and continue to grow it. Research intervention with, and what is it that we need to really think through with local country governments? 2 quick thoughts on this. We know that tourism is a resilient sector, and we know that when there is a crisis or we work with a fragile state, that tourism is one of those sectors that comes back and that people watch to see, okay, the tourism sector is coming back, so we must be getting on with things, right? And certainly even in Nepal, where the damage and the extent is so amazing, if the tourism sector doesn't come back, it's going to be tough, really tough for that country to really get on its feet. So how do you work with, as you say, both the local governments and also the national governments, also the donors and the funding agencies, because they all need to be part of that discussion. And in the case of both Myanmar and also in terms of Nepal, after there were, in the case of Myanmar, the country opening, and also in the case of Nepal, that after the earthquake, when I've had discussions with some of the donors and some of the government people about tourism, they're all like, oh, no, we'll talk about that in 3 years. And I'm saying, no, this is the time to do it now, not later. And it's tough, but sometimes you have a little bit of a breakthrough. And in the case of, frankly, East Timor, we literally began talking about developing a visitor economy, not a tourism sector. Because what you need in fragile states and post-fragile or in post-conflict countries is to have the visitor infrastructure in place that over time can turn into your tourism sector. So again, how do you convince them? I think you convince them by showing examples from other countries and other locations. That's number 1. But number 2, I also think, is that we need to do more research. And I have talked with my colleagues at the bank to say, we don't know at what point is the right time to go in after a disaster to really begin to redevelop the tourism sector or the visitor economy. And that's an area where we could do some research that would be really exciting, both in terms of being able to demonstrate quantitatively what's happened, but also to provide lessons for the future in other post-conflict environments. Recovering tourism in Venezuela. You know, this is a tough one. One of the things about image and tourism recovery is that it takes a long time. And one of the challenges that I face in tourism research and tourism development in the World Bank all the time is, we want results now. Now. And I keep saying, wait a minute, you know, it's tourism all the time. Now, you know, what are you going to do? Now, right? But the flip side is that in terms of Venezuela or other countries that are in that kind of a situation, it takes time, and it's a multiple step, both process and set of solutions. So I don't have an answer for you on that one, except, again, to look at other cases, but also to begin to see where there are opportunities to come back in the short term, the medium term, and the longer term. Because it will take all of those. It doesn't just happen overnight. I wish we had the switch that we could say, okay, boom, they're all coming. And the historical will build it and they'll come. We know from many, many experiences that that's not what it takes to really develop a sustainable sector. So encouraging, in both of these instances, a longer-term view, but with both short-term change as well as medium-term activities that create an investment over time is how we can get to that point of really having economically productive and sustainable tourism. Time's up. No.
We still have a few minutes if you'd like to share your video.
Ah, okay. Do you have, I think Faza, where's Faza? Oh, Faza, come on. I just want to show very quickly the, this is just a minute of this video on getting financed. This was also part of the research that we did in Namibia.
Community joint ventures in tourism have been creating a buzz for a while, with pioneers like Namibia bringing the private sector and communities together in commercial partnerships. The country has attracted learning delegations from as far afield as the US and Mongolia. Right now, the story looks good, but our analysis shows that over the longer term there are also challenges. Community joint ventures fuse community assets, like land or wildlife, with private sector capital and know-how. We've seen some impressive benefits. Namibia's elephant population has doubled, communities receive around $7 million a year, and the tourism industry has created award-winning products. But now, 20 years on, these businesses need new capital to keep growing, and they're struggling. Commercial banks are unconvinced that the joint venture model is truly commercially viable, and they're nervous to lend. The World Bank Group and World Wildlife Fund have come up with 9 tips for existing actors and new players to get to the bottom of this issue.
All right. We at the World Bank, although historically we have lots of paper, we also are doing more and more along the lines of both social media as well as developing different types of information channels in order to engage people to think differently about tourism. And once again, in this case, very applied, but nonetheless was really focused on the learnings that we had to try and move forward the sector in Namibia and also apply it to other places around the world. So may I just close by saying a very sincere thank you to Dr. Henrici and also Dr. Lamoureux for inviting me here today. It is always a treat, a real treat to be here at GW, and I look forward to talking with all of you afterwards in terms of your ideas and thoughts in the area of tourism research. Thank you very much.